I am a very strong person now just because of who I've been, what I've gone through, and what I've had to do to survive. I just am, right? But it would have been nice if when I came out, I was embraced the way that a lot of other people were. Hey guys, it's Kat and it's time for yet another episode of True Tea. I want to thank you guys so much for coming yet again to this channel. I don't know why you guys keep coming back, but I mean, I know why, because you guys like to drink tea like I do. So that's why you're here every single Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I appreciate you guys for being here. I appreciate you guys for participating in my platform and for, always leaving your long, your thick, your heavy, your well-brewed tea in my comment section. I really appreciate it. It really does mean a lot. And I just want to thank you guys for always coming every week and contributing. It really does mean a lot to me from the very, very, very bottom of my heart. If you're brand new here, what we like to do here is learn, share, and grow through education and conversation. And this is the conversation segment of my channel. We like to just talk about whatever. This is all about being open and just having a real honest conversation, even if I'm not correct, even if you're not correct. We like to just talk about these things and sort of just have a conversation and hopefully, who knows, maybe reach resolution when it fits, So anyway, that's what we're gonna be doing in this video, so I hope you guys enjoy it. And as usual, I always suggest that you guys go to your kitchen and grab yourself some tea before we get into this. Now, personally, I'm drinking some Peach Tranquility tea by Tivana out of my New Mexico cup. This is my favorite cup. I'm not trying to pit people against each other. I'm not trying to pit like skulls against each other, but this cup is really, really dank. So thank you to the University of New Mexico for giving it to me. I miss Albuquerque. I truly do. I miss all of the Breaking Bad things that I didn't do when I was in town. So thank you for inviting me out there. Maybe I'll have an excuse to come back. So yeah. Anyway, let me take a sip before we jump into this video. So I'm waving around my flag because I wanted to do another conversation relating to Pride Month. I don't know when this video is gonna go up. Maybe it's not gonna go up during Pride Month, but I want to talk to you guys about my feelings around coming out. Now, this is gonna be another one of those videos where if you've been following me for a very long time and you're a long time, Kat Blaque stan, you've already heard me say some of this. I'm so sorry for repeating myself. I mean, not really, but I'm going to repeat myself in this video. So if you already know how I feel about this, click the ad and leave, okay? But anyway, we're gonna be talking about coming out because I felt like it would be really important to talk about, my coming out experience, but then also what I feel has become like this culture around coming out and how it's kind of made me feel based on my own personal experiences with coming out. So let's go. So a lot of you guys, if for some reason this is the first video that you're catching of mine, first of all, I'm sorry. We do a lot of fun content here. You should watch some of these other videos. But I'm a trans woman and I transitioned when I was 16 years old and 28 years old now. And of course I had a lot of those conversations before I started my transition and things like that. But I figured out who I was pretty young, relatively, right? And so that kind of made coming out this sort of big, scary thing for me. I've talked in the past, I've referenced this in the past, but when I was coming up, narratives around LGBT lives are very different, And it's weird because I'm 28, I know that I may always say that I'm old, but I'm not. I know I'm still quite young. And it's been kind of interesting to sort of see the ways in which these conversations have changed because these conversations have truly changed in so many ways. I mean, when I was growing up and I was reading about not only the lives of trans people, but the lives of a lot of LGBT people, so much of the work that people were putting out was about finding ways to find each other through this sort of system where we're hiding, right? This system where we're not being out, we're not being open, trying to find other people in a world where we're not all being so open and loud and proud about who we are. And so it's interesting to sort of see with the advent of social media and with YouTube and Facebook, how narratives around coming out have changed because I just feel when I see all this stuff that I just had a very, 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 very different experience, right? So I don't want to be cliche, I don't want to be cliche, and I'm not going to get into super specifics because they don't really matter, honestly. But, you know, when I was younger, I always knew I was different. You know, I too cried in front of a mirror, you know, looking at myself and saying, oh my gosh, you're just so ugly. You ever seen the trans drinking game where it's like, it's like take a shot every time you see any trans portrayal in the media where there's like a person sitting in front of the mirror rather, just crying and like taking their wig off and shaving their head. Like, I'm not gonna say that wasn't part of my life because it was, but you know, I figured out who I was I'm joking. I figured out who I was very early on. I didn't really always have a word for it because representation at the time was not what it is today. I didn't know that being trans was a possibility. And so when it came to actually like who I was, there was a lot of hesitation around me like actually claiming aggressively who I am. You know, back then, trans women were these freaks on Maury or these freaks on Jerry Springer or these people, you know, that got killed because they tricked a man. You know, that was who trans people were, these just weirdos and freaks. And it took me a while to actually see positive trans representations for me to understand that being a trans person was something that I could be, right? But of course, once I started looking into that, I really started, I had this deep understanding that if I were going to transition, if I was going to be who I was, it would mean that I would potentially have to let go of a lot of the comforts of my current life. Now, I made a joke in one of my previous videos about, you know, the narrative around being a trans person for a really long time was like, I figured out that I was transgender. I started taking hormones. I started passing. I had the surgery. I killed everybody who ever knew me before, moved to another state. And now I'm sitting here. I'm at the front porch of my white picketed fence house. I've got a husband. I got 2.5 kids and a dog. And I'm just living the most perfect life. And no one knows that I'm transgender. I mean, all that's true with the exception of the killing part. But, you know, that was very much the story of like people transitioning to disappear, people transitioning to fade away in the background. There was not a, you know, Janet Mock or a Laverne Cox. There was not really things like that. I mean, there were trans people who were celebrities, so to speak, but it wasn't really common to see trans representation. We didn't have, you know, we had YouTube, I guess, in 2005, but before that, we didn't have a thing we could just click on and watch a trans person, you know, start functioning and being. I mean, I don't want to get too much into my sort of story, but a big sort of catalyst for me was seeing Calpurnia Adams' story in Soldier's Girl, and then finding her work with what's her name? I want to say Andrea Johnson. I don't know if that's the right name, but she used to have this series that she would do with another trans woman that was all about, you know, transitioning and stealth and all these other things. And like, that was very much the narrative, right? It was very much this sort of like transition to disappear sort of thing. And as I talked about in previous videos, that was a lot about survival. So as a young kid, as I was taking in all this information, I became really aware that coming out for me was going to be a very, very scary process, right? And so for me, I guess in so many ways, I had multiple instances of coming out. When I was younger, I told my mother that I was attracted to men, right? And my family's very passive aggressive. We're the kind of family that writes letters to each other. And my dad was the kind of person who, you know, instead of actually having a conversation with me, he would write, you know, this really well thought out, you know, Paige, he worked in corporate America. My dad's an accountant. And he would paste, you know, a picture, you know, this list, this well-formatted, well-written list on the fridge instead of having a conversation. So I wrote my mom this really long paper about me being attracted to men. And when I told my mom that, she said, I don't really think that's what that is. I don't really think that's it, you know? And I didn't really understand that at the time, because when I did this, I was really young. I think I was like 15 when I told her this. And, you know, I didn't, because I was still figuring out my gender stuff. Some of you guys know that when I went to college was when I recognized that I was a binary trans woman. And my first year of college was when I was 17 years old. I had a late birthday. It's like I went ahead of time. I just have a late birthday. But yeah, so I I had that experience of coming out to my mom and being really worried about it and being really nervous. And my mom sort of kept it from my dad for a bit. And meanwhile, I was already moving pieces because I knew that if my dad knew that I was not the ideal person that he wanted me to be, because mind you, my parents adopted both me and my little brother. Yes, my parents are Black, don't ask. My parents adopted both me and my little brother. And that was a very deliberate decision. They could have adopted a little girl if they wanted a little girl, because, you know, my mom wanted a little girl, but, you know, they didn't, you know? And so for me, I kind of had so many layers of, I'm going to be disowned and I'm going to be a disappointment. And so what I started to do when I was younger was just kind of move pieces together so that I could just sort of get to a point where I was independent, where I didn't need them, where I wasn't relying on them. And so if you watch one of the earlier videos I did when I came back to True Tea, I'll put it up here. I told this story in depth, but one of the big things that would happen is I would find these men online who would help me get work. And I found this artist who lived in Los Angeles, and it was a really initially great experience for me because I was able to sort of go out to LA, where I always wanted to go, and be myself in so many ways. And so my trans sort of survival kind of went like this. Now, some of you guys know that this channel initially started as a transgender themed sewing channel. That's why my username is Trans DIYer. Because I was gonna do like trans sewing videos. But I used to make these like little t-shirt dresses. I would take, you know, a t-shirt, a big t-shirt, I would cut the sleeves off of it, and I would turn that into like the breast part of it. Then I would take like the bottom part of the shirt and I would pleat it to the breast part of it. And I would make like these sleeveless dresses that I would wear all the time, right? And that was like my first sort of feminine clothing. I mean, I was very afraid of going to shop in the store. I was very afraid of, you know, being caught trying to be feminine. And so a lot of what I did was I would make all these clothes locked away in my room by hand. I didn't have a sewing machine or anything. And I would just have this collection of feminine clothes that I never showed my parents because I knew that they wouldn't like it, right? And so I would put those clothes on in my room. I put like a baggy hoodie sweatshirt on, some baggy pants, and I would walk to the bus stop. I would, you know, and I put that stuff on so that my parents wouldn't see me on my way going down to the bus stop, right? And so I would walk to the bus stop. I would go back up behind, there's like a hill right behind the bus stop that I would go to. And there was like these bushes that you can kind of go into, and I would take the clothes off. And sometimes I would put my clothes under the bus stop. Sometimes I would put my clothes in the back of those bushes, and I would jump on the bus and I would go to Hollywood looking just like this. And I told the story of, you know, when I'd be on Hollywood Boulevard looking for work, you know, asking people, you know, for jobs. And often I'd be laughed out of businesses and things like that. And so that's why I started going online. And so when I had this opportunity to work with this artist in LA, it was like finally I was going to LA and I was actually going to be starting to make some money. Now, again, if you watch that video that I linked to, but the summary of the story is that this guy created this really amazing environment for me to be myself. I was on his arm all the time. I was 15, I was young. He was taking me around LA to these shows, and, you know, he was introducing me to his friends, and he was always introducing me, you know, as a woman. You know, my old name used to be Kitty. So he'd always introduce me as Kitty. And I kind of through a lot of those experiences, I started to kind of really sort of feel more comfortable in the idea of my more binary gender, honestly. But I worked with him for a while. I worked with him for a couple of years, and long story short, he groomed me for a year and then he raped me. And so that was kind of my experience. And meanwhile, while this is happening, my parents had no clue that I was trans. They had no clue, you know? And so here I was doing all this dangerous shit in LA, making some money so that I can kind of make it work and sort of survive. And after that happened to me, there was a slew of other incidences where, you know, I was sort of engaging with these men so that they could help me survive in many ways. I was, you know, this is another conversation for another video, but sometimes one of the reactions you have when you're a survivor of sexual violence is you try really hard to reclaim the abuse. You try really hard to put yourself into a position where you feel like you're in control. And so I did a lot of like trying to sort of use men sort of thing, which really was allowing them to use me so that I can, in my way, use them. So I got a lot of work through being sexual with men and things like that. And that was just kind of my late teenage life, right? Was me being exploited in so many ways by these men and getting money, all because I was really afraid of coming out to my parents, all because I was really afraid of being in a situation where I told my parents, hey, I'm trans, and then I get kicked out, you know? I was just so afraid of that. So of course, by the time I went to college, I definitely had more security because I was living at college. I was seeing my parents only so often. And so that's when I was able to really spread my wings and become who I am and things like that, and really understand myself a lot more. But a lot of my early years as a teenager were spent with me struggling and being hurt and being abused, all because I was so afraid of being out. And so I guess in some ways, it's interesting for me to observe this culture that we now have around coming out, you know, around being an LGBT voice on the internet specifically. Now, I will say that, and maybe this is gonna sound a little salty, I kind of envy people who were able to sort of turn their coming out story into a big deal on the internet. You know, there's so many people who make these videos where they're coming out as something, you know, they're coming out. And I've never been able to do that because I've always existed on here as a trans person. You know, you can, if you're really thrifty, you can still find videos of me 15 years old on here, and you can see that I'm not going to tell you what the old header of my old YouTube channel used to be. So obnoxious, but it was like, I'm using queer to define myself and things, and I have videos talking about gender and things like those. Some of those videos are still on YouTube. I will not help you find them, but they still exist. But anyway, I never have been able to kind of come out on YouTube as a thing. And I guess maybe there's a part of me as someone who does YouTube full time that sort of like is sad that I was never able to do that. But I don't know. I guess in so many ways, it's cool that we have that sort of stuff still happening. I mean, some of my hesitation around that sort of coming out content, because there's been a couple of years ago, it was really common for people to do this thing where they record a phone conversation they have with their parents coming out, right? And so often the result was, you know, them telling their parents, oh, I'm gay or whatever. And then the parents like accept them, right? The parent sort of like celebrates them and is like, oh my gosh, I still love you anyway. And I guess in so many ways, because of my experience, that was so hard for me to watch. I mean, because of course I'm happy for everyone to have acceptance, but I never really had that, you know? When I eventually figured out that I was a trans woman, when I eventually figured out that I was not, you know, a genderqueer person or anything like that, I wrote my dad a very long letter. I wrote my dad a 9-page letter going into it. And the crux of the letter really was that because this is when I was about 19, I was 18, 19 years old, and I was about to actually legally pursue hormones. I'd been using black market hormones for a couple of years. I wanted to change my name. I wanted to change my gender marker. And at the time in California, the requirements for doing that were to prove that you were on hormones or you were, you know, intending on taking hormones. And so, you know, I wanted to have a conversation with my dad about it because, you know, I grew up with my little brother getting a lot of help from my family, getting a lot of financial support from my family because of his issues, which I won't get into. And I just wanted them to be aware of this. And I also was asking them for help because at the time, the reality of the situation was I have no way of making money. And I didn't get into the details of like what I had to do when I was younger to make a little bit of money. But I knew, because at this point in my life, I'd been in school, I had financial aid. I wasn't really doing that stuff anymore. I mean, I still had a lot of unhealthy interactions with men, but I wasn't doing it for money anymore, right? And I kind of recognized that when it came to hormones, because at the time, in order to get hormones, you had to go to therapy. Therapy is very expensive. And then once you get the hormones, it's very, 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 very expensive, right? And so I knew that the reality would be is if I'm in a situation where my parents are not helping me, I'm gonna have to revert to shit that I used to do that I didn't want to do anymore, you know? And so I wrote my parents a really, really long letter telling them all about that. And when my dad read it, which I'll get to later, but my dad reading it, he very curtly responded to me by saying that he doesn't agree with my lifestyle and that he's no longer going to financially support me. And that was like a shock in the gut, because you guys will probably see a common thread in my life, and this is why I've been trying so hard to live authentically. I do this thing where I keep something to myself, I keep something to myself because I'm so afraid of expressing it to somebody and then having them reject me. I'm so afraid of telling someone the truth about me and then having them reject me, because it's not that I'm afraid of rejection at all, really. It's more like I want to maintain a positive image of a person, and it's one thing to be in a situation where you have an idea or a suspicion about how someone feels about something. It's an entirely other thing to have that hard answer where they say no. You know, it was one thing for me to observe my dad, you know, when I was younger, watching an AIDS, you know, an AIDS news story and say, well, that's God's retribution for homosexuality. It's one thing for me to see that and then interpret, oh, he's never going to be supportive of me as a trans person. It's another thing for him to blatantly say he's not going to support me, right? And so I knew that I was going to have to survive. And maybe we'll do another video about this at some point, but I did, for a very short period of time, end up doing sex work because I wanted to afford hormones. You know, and I guess having that sort of rejection from my father, it was so painful, so painful, because again, I saw my parents endlessly support my little brother, which again, I'm not going to get into his stuff, but endlessly support my little brother. And they couldn't even do what they were doing for my little brother, which was go to therapy and things. They couldn't even do that, you know? And as I got older, I kind of recognized a bit of why my parents reacted the way they did. My little brother has a lot of issues, and they always sort of viewed me as the more competent child. And so when it came to me ever going to therapy or me ever having a conversation with them about any serious shit, in the back of their mind, they were like, oh, you know, she's fine. And that's why when I was in a situation where this man was grooming me, they never checked in on me, because they said, well, you know, she's fine. You know, she's not up to anything. And so, you know, that's another conversation for another time. But I guess sometimes that's why it's hard for me sometimes to hear, I guess, positive stories, because the reality is so I'm divided on this, because on one hand, I love these positive coming out stories, because it A, tells me that we've been getting better, and B, it does show that you can have a loving family, you know, and things like that. But I know that that it's still a reality that, you know, over 40% of homeless youth are LGBT, and sometimes coming out to you know, your parents means you could be kicked out, means you could be just completely financially unsupported. And so, you know, it's been, I've always been very cautious, because while I definitely think that the era of hiding in stealth and things like that was not necessarily healthy, I also think it was smart to, if you can, not necessarily tell everyone about your stuff until you're in the situation where you can support yourself. You know, even though I went through all that negative shit, and I don't want to anyone else to have gone through that, in so many ways, I'm thankful that I did hold off. I'm thankful that I did not talk about it until I got to a point where I was at least away from my family. You know, at the end of college, I did move it back in with my parents, which was particularly odd, because in 2012, I was stealth and things. And so that was really odd, because my parents just did not get it. My parents just did not get it. One of the last things that my parents asked me before, my dad asked me before I moved out with my ex, was, what bathroom do I use? Like, what bathroom do I go to when I'm in public? And this was like years into my transition. Like, I'm stealth at this point. He just doesn't get it, you know. But this is another part. That's a part of another conversation where, as I got older, I recognized that I had really put my father on this pedestal where I thought that he was just really smart and just very thoughtful. And not that my dad isn't smart, not that he isn't thoughtful, but he's not this, you know, paragon of, you know, perfection that I thought that he was. You know, my mom, I talked about this in the previous video, but my mom was always the more competent person. My mom is a Harvard grad, and, you know, she has all these awesome things. She's very, very smart. And as I got older, I kind of saw that what my mom had done was become a little smaller and quieter so that he could sort of lead the family, even though he didn't have that personality. And as I got older, and as I talked to my dad about it, about this stuff, because, you know, I did and do still have a lot of resentment for my father, because he doesn't understand all of the things that I had to go through after telling him that I was trans, you know, and him saying, oh, I'm not going to support this. Like, he doesn't understand all of the scary stuff that I had to experience because he rejected me, right? And I had a conversation about this with him, you know, a while back, because my dad's an accountant, so he's always asking me about my taxes. And I just went off on him because I hate because what happened, we're now really getting into it. What happened with me and my situation was, you know, my dad rejected me, but once I started becoming more popular on YouTube and started becoming more successful and start making money, that's when he started talking to me again. That's when he needed me to send him money and things like that. And it really sucked, because I would not be who I am today. I would not be on this YouTube channel doing this full time and being as successful as I am now had it not been for my dad rejecting me, had it not been for my dad saying, you know what, I'm not going to support this, right? But one of the things I learned in that conversation is that even though I wrote him a 9-page letter, even though I told him all of this stuff and I really he never read it. He never read it. He never read it. And so I had resented him for years, especially because when I experienced sexual violence, I experienced it more than once. He was never there for me. I didn't have that sort of male figure that I could turn to and say, hey, I've been hurt. Hey, I've been vulnerable. Because my dad doesn't even see me. Do you know what I mean? My dad doesn't even see me for who I am. So he doesn't even understand that as a woman, there are still things in this world that I deal with, because in so many ways I am seen as the lesser sex, right? And so, sorry, now I'm getting emotional. I'm trying not to get too emotional. Yeah, I mean, I guess in so many ways, you know, we always think things would be better if they were different. In so many ways, I'm thankful that I lived the life the way that I lived my life, that I had the experiences that I had, that I was able to, you know, become who I am because of the rejection that I experienced, because of all of the negative things that I've gone through. Because I am a very strong person now, just because of who I've been, what I've gone through, and what I've had to do to survive. I just am, right? But it would have been nice if, when I came out, I was embraced the way that a lot of other people were, you know? Getting away from me a little bit. One of the things I think about a lot when it comes to coming out is, and, you know, and I did a whole video kind of about pride a couple of weeks ago, right? One of the things I think a lot about when it comes to coming out is, like, how important is it for us to announce ourselves, right? Because I guess in a world where we're putting our LGBT shit everywhere, you know, everyone has to know what acronym, you know, what letter in the acronym we are, we feel like people who don't do that are somehow ashamed, right? Let me tell you guys a quick little story. When I was in college, there was this guy. He was so adorable. Like this, he was really cute and he was really, really talented. And he would always hang out with this girl. And I think everyone thought that they were a couple. Everyone thought that they were a couple, they were together or whatever. And, you know, because of that, no one really was questioning like what about him or anything like that, right? And every time I would ask if they were together, it would always be like, oh, no, we're not. But it was like, oh, okay, of course you're not, you know? And I remember when it came to me asking the girl, she'd always just kind of smile and like, no, that's not what's happening. And it always seemed like a, oh, you guys sort of thing. But when I was like a couple of, like a year ago or so, I'm on Facebook and I randomly see that he just got engaged to a guy. And there was never a conversation ever about his sexuality. He was not out, and of course in college I was so out there. But he was never out. No one knew that he was attracted to men or was interested in men or was dating men. No one knew. But, when it came to him becoming engaged or whatever, he was like, well, I'm getting engaged. And he treated it like it was not a big deal. It was not this big thing, And I guess there was a part of me that when I saw that was like, oh my God, why didn't he tell me? Like, why didn't he have a conversation? Because we'd had so many conversations, we got along so well, and we would always talk, but he never told me about his sexuality. And then I recognized that there's really no reason for him to have had done that. There's no reason that he should have told me anything about his sexuality. That's not really any of my business, truly. And so why do I feel this weird sense of like betrayal because he didn't tell me about his sexuality? It's nonsensical. It makes absolutely no sense, right? And it just made me really think about, how it's not important, I think when it comes to being out, it's as important as it is to that person. Because a lot of times when someone hasn't come out and claimed their sexuality, we say, oh, he's ashamed of himself, or she's ashamed of herself, or they're ashamed of themselves. We think that, right? We say that, but sometimes it's just not that important for everybody to know all these different things about you. And I don't think that not talking about it, not putting it in your description on Twitter or something means that you're ashamed of it. It just means that maybe for you, it's not that important and that you have the right to have that. So anyway, I'm very curious what you guys feel about coming out and what you guys feel about, a lot of the stuff that I talked about. What was your coming out experience like? I'm really particularly interested in hearing from people who are a little older than me, what their coming out life was and how they feel about the culture around coming out that we have now, because we sort of expect for people to announce their sexuality. We kind of expect for people to announce their, where they fall on the spectrum of sexuality and or gender, but maybe it's not important enough to announce, right? Maybe it's just not important enough to announce. So anyway, I'd love to get your true tea brew in the comment box below. Please leave it. I would always appreciate it. Right now, you're looking at 2 videos that you can watch to continue to watch True Tea and get your brew right here on this channel. Also in the corner, you can send me a tip if you want. That's all the information about how you can do that right there. So yeah, I will see you guys next week. Bye.